On this episode of the Camp Owners Podcast, Howie and I sit down with Michelle Cummings of Training Wheels. If you haven't had the opportunity to experience a breakout session, either in person or virtually with Michelle Cummings, you are in for a treat. Michelle gives us a lot of really great practical, hands-on, applicable ideas for your in-person or virtual training as you are planning this year. We know camp owners' plates are incredibly heavy right now. So Howie and I were hoping to be able to give you an episode where you could have some takeaways that you can implement to lighten that load a little bit as you train your staff for this upcoming summer. Have a listen, enjoy it, and best of luck.
Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast, a space for camp owners to talk about the unique aspects of camp ownership and get inspired by each other. We are going to sit down with camp industry experts, leaders, and fellow camp owners to hear how the camp dream transpired for them, learn from each other, and discuss some of the biggest issues in the private camp industry. Hello, everyone. My name is Howie Grossinger, and I am the co-owner of Camp Robin Hood, a day camp in the suburbs of Toronto, Canada.
Hello, everyone. I am Kelly Shuna, co-owner and director of Hidden Pines Ranch Day Camp, located in Stillwater, Minnesota. If you are looking to find and subscribe to the Camp Owners Podcast, you can either find us online at gocamp.pro/ownerspod or by searching for us in your favorite podcast app. Finally, if you're listening to this and think it would be useful for other camp owners or aspiring camp owners in your circle, please feel free to send them a note to listen.
Well, Kelly, I am super excited about this one. Another great topic, and happy to tell everybody about it. As we approach the final stages of summer prep, staff training is an integral part of our summer success. Many camps are planning for virtual training, in-person training, or a hybrid of both. Our guest today has been an expert in our industry on in-person team building and has now established herself as a virtual team building resource as a result of our need to shift to an online space over the past year. We're excited to have Michelle Cummings of Training Wheels share with us her best practices for team building, both in person and virtually, as well as ideas we can all implement with our staff this summer. Welcome, Michelle. Hi, Kelly. Really excited about this one.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you guys.
We're so excited to have you, Michelle. I was lucky enough to go through a virtual team building exercise with you during the Northland ACA Camp Conference, and just was even more impressed than I was in the past with your shift to virtual. So I sent a message to Howie and said, Howie, we got to get Michelle on.
Heck yeah.
So we're so excited that you could be here today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so that event was recent, and I will say that I was one of the pre-pandemic. I was probably one of the loudest voices to say, no, we don't need to do team building online because the in-person stuff is just so good. So, but literally, when push came to shove, I had literally had to be drug kicking and screaming into the virtual space because I'm like, no, I don't want to do it, right? And now that I was literally forced into it, now I kind of really dig it. And, it tapped into my creativity in such a different way than what I have ever had to do before. And I really, now I actually will say that I love it. I love the in-person more. I will 1,000% shout that from the mountaintops, but I will now say we can do virtual team building well.
Well, I couldn't tell that you were kicking and screaming on your way to get there. So you're doing a great job. I really, really, really appreciated your expertise that you shared with us. So something that we like to do, Michelle, for all of our guests at the beginning, before we start our discussion, is to have you share your connection with the camp industry. How did you get involved with camp? What's your camp history? How did kind of this dream, I'm assuming, transpire for you of doing team building and working with camps?
Yeah. I have a very long history of camp. I love camp, have always loved camp. When I was a kid, I begged my parents to send me to whatever camp they would send me, they could afford, and that they would send me to. I'm a farm kid from Kansas, and we were a self-supporting farm family when I was a kid growing up. So we used to tease my parents. The only time they let us go to town was for church and toilet paper and school, because we literally had everything else we needed on the farm. So the chance to, and I'm an explorer by nature. Like I just love to experience, see, do new things. And so camp just opened that up for me. And I got to meet new people, go new places, see new things, experience new things. And so I was like that camper that every camp wishes they had, because I was just like, I want to do all the things. I want to meet all the people. So there was one summer I remember my parents literally sent me to 8 camps in one summer. Now some of them were date camp and some were sports camps, church camp. I even went to citizens camp, like to learn how to be a better U.S. citizen. Like that doesn't sound like it was all that much fun, but man, it really was. So camper, I was a camper all day long, anytime I got the opportunity. Then when I went to college, I became a camp staff and worked at summer camps when I was still, in that 18 to 21 year range. And then I got my bachelor's degree in psychology, and then I went to work at a long-term residential camp for troubled kids. And so with my, counseling degree, psychology degree, went into it and worked with really hard kids. Kids that had hard behaviors. How about that? And these were kids that were making really poor decisions for themselves out in the world. And so it was long-term residential. They lived at the camp anywhere from 6 to 9 months, but the average length of stay was 6 to 9 months, but they could be out there for as long as 18 months at a time. So, and it was a wilderness camp. So we lived outside in tents, in the woods, in Texas. It was awesome. That's where I fell in love with team building and fell in love with experiential activities, because I saw amazing transformations in kids after going through the experiential part of what we did. And I could talk all day long about that. But then after that, I became a camp director for a camp in Colorado. And then that's where I met my husband. And then after that, that's when I started Training Wheels. And then now I am a service provider to camps and have been ever since I started Training Wheels. But then I also now have I have 2 children and now I'm also a camp parent. So, and I tell you what, that waiver is a lot scarier when you are the camp parent signing it rather than the camp director, like saying, here, sign this waiver, right? But anyway, and my children both go to multiple camps each summer as well. So I feel like I've got like all 4 quadrants of camp there really covered from lots of aspects.
Well, there's so much to unpack there, Michelle. I think we could
Right?
really do a lot of really awesome stuff. I mean, we all know, being in the industry, that there are camps of all stripes and time lengths and focus, but Citizens Camp is a really new one for me. So I'm going to embrace that. What does the evaluation to a parent look like after a week of Citizens Camp? I'm very curious, but we don't have time to dig into that. But I was very intrigued to hear about Citizens Camp.
Yeah.
The topic that we're going to be exploring with you is one that no doubt has been on the minds of so many camp operators, because for many of us who didn't operate in 2020, we're having our teams come back. So much has happened in the lives of members of our teams in the absence of being together in the spaces that we all feel so safe in and love to be in together. And so I'm sure there'll be a lot to unpack when it comes to that. Team building for me, my other life is that of a sports coach, and I've had the pleasure of coaching really great teams and having teams come from all kinds of different avenues. And because I'm a camp guy and because I'm a coach, team building has always been something I've leaned on to expedite sort of culture and relationships and working well together. So I know personally this is something that is really exciting to talk about at this time of year. For Kelly and myself, as we contemplated sort of how to kick off this discussion, I think, philosophically, I think we just want to get right back to sort of, where does, what are some of the foundational principles of team building for you? I mean, it's so applicable in so many different milieux that I feel like it could be, I think we'd like to really know where you come from in terms of the elements that it satisfies and the foundation of sort of the principles of this great work you do through Training Wheels and the services you provide all of us in the industry. So I think that's probably the starting point for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so when I hear the word team building, really one of the first things and actually, if I were to say, okay, guys, we're going to do a team building activity, like in your mind, the listeners are probably like, okay, in your mind, you have now like something is in your mind. What is a team building activity? So you have this picture of what it looks like. And team building in my mind might look a little different than what team building looks like in your mind. And so when I get asked what is team building anymore, I almost stop and I pause right there and I'm like, actually, I want to dissect what team building is a little bit and break it down into three categories, because in my mind, there's three categories that kind of get all lumped into team building. And they're three very different categories, in my opinion. And the first is team bonding, and then it's team building, and then it's team development. And all three of those get lumped into team building. And so a good example of this is, when you're driving around in your car and you look over at the go-kart track, like the amusement park kind of thing. They're like, we do team building. I'm like, do you really? Right? Like for me, I'm like, in my opinion, that does not fit my definition of what a team building activity is. But for them, they're like, yeah, we get people together and they, it could be teams from an organization, it could be whatever. To them, that means team building. So in my opinion, that then falls under team bonding. So in my mind, team bonding, really kind of is a program that is designed around a very simple goal or an outcome of just having fun, and there's such value in that. So, and let me be very clear that there is extreme value in all three of these different categories: team bonding, team building, and team development. But in team bonding, it typically there's not reflection time or debriefing built in. It can act as a standalone event. It could follow a specific schedule, but it's not really catered to like an end goal for the group. It's just like, hey, let's get together and bond, have some fun, right? And then there's team building, and that's more, I don't do much team bonding, maybe a little bit, but not very much. Now, team building is more where I think the experiential activities that, I carry in my online store and that I teach people at conferences and all that is more where I live. Because in my mind, team building activities and experiential activities are intentionally chosen to surface specific behaviors that I want to teach skills in or reinforce concepts in. And so these activities have a specific goal or outcome, and it's transferable back to the real world. And there's an intentional sequence or curriculum or flow that I've designed to the program. And it's usually facilitated by somebody that has skills in debriefing and kind of, they have rubber chickens and know what to do with them, basically. It's not just this silly toy, but we do something with that, right? It's not just the rubber chicken. But it allows for built-in reflection time. We have intentionally chosen this sequence of activities or this particular activity because of an outcome that we're trying to get to. And then there's team development. Team development is really it's the long-term team building. It's designed around long-term goals, usually has multiple phases or curriculums or maybe even behavioral assessments, or something like that. And it's ongoing programming. So it's not just a 1 4-hour program and bye, see you later. Thanks for playing. Thanks for having fun. It is long-term, it's intentional, and usually facilitated by a master facilitator or somebody that really has a lot of skills or training in experiential work. And they work really closely with, the directors or the counselors or whoever it is, if you're going for organizational or behavioral change in either an organization or a child or anything like that. So for me, that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I think it's so important to define it first, because when I say there's nothing worse than a client calling and saying, hey, we want to do team building, and they want team bonding, and you start pricing and offering them team development. Like that's a very different, and you're going to set yourself and your client up for failure. If that's what they're expecting, team bonding. Hey, we want to get together and go karting and share a couple of drinks and things like that. And you're like, oh, we could do behavioral assessments. We could do all these things, like all these crazy things. And they're like, but you're a lot. You're a lot.
Well, yes, and I was going to add in that wonderful explanation. I mean, each of those buckets you described allows you to, at least for me, to do even almost a self-assessment of what are those things that I think I can deliver based on my experience and my own skill set or my team skill set, and which of those do I need to call on a professional facilitator or someone who's more skilled outside of my my organization that could help do that. And I think that, at least it's my experience with team building, using just that catch-all phrase now that we've defined it, but just in general, is that part of the challenge is identifying what you want your outcome to be initially, and then determining what path you will go down to do that. And I think that's really helpful, at least for me, because boy, this word team and building our team, I can see how we all have different lenses we see that through. Isn't that right, Kels?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought a lot about what Michelle said regarding experiential learning, because my experience and what I see a lot of camp directors, owners, is unless you are experiencing and doing it, it is so hard to then do with others or model for your staff. And so it's almost like we have to experience right alongside. So then when we turn to staff and want them to do it with campers, they can do it versus, okay, for this team building exercise, this is what you have to do. Like, no, I can't read it. I need to do it.
Right. Exactly.
So I like that. And I like breaking it down, because I agree, Howie, that it's like a self-assessment of what do we do for team building with staff? What do we do for bonding? And what do we do for that continuing development? So I think that that's really helpful in thinking about staff training this year,
so I have, should I share activities as well that we can do? Because I have a couple of such good ones that we could totally do.
Oh yeah, Michelle, this is like a 2-for-1.
Okay. So here's my favorite thing. So I know your staff trainings are coming up. Some of you might be virtual, some of you might be in person, but here's a great non-prop activity that you could do in both worlds, virtual or in person. And for me, when you're designing, as a camp director, when you're designing your staff training, please, I beg you, don't make it so sit and get, where they're literally just sitting and listening to you talking, that they are bored out of their skulls. Because when you're learning, if you have something that's engaging, you're going to be that much more attentive, and B, you're going to remember it so much better. I mean, there's great statistics out there that, of course, support learning, that we only retain 10% of what we hear, 20% of what we see, and 70% of what we do. So if you think about a return on your investment, and that investment is time, and that is a big investment, right? That wouldn't you rather your staff retain 70% of what you're teaching them? Absolutely. And then those statistics go on further to say you retain 90% of what you teach. So then if you teach, your staff a certain skill, have them then go teach that same skill to somebody else, and they'll retain it by 90% even more. So one of my favorite activities, non-prop, is called As If. Okay, so this one here, it is a great activity where you have your participants partner up. So your staff, like, say, hey, find a partner. Okay, great. Now stand about 5-6 feet apart from one another, facing one another, or 2 meters if you're on the metric system. Face your partner. And now what I want you to do is walk towards your partner and greet your partner as if they were, and then you're going to give them a role that you want them to play out with one another. And so that you want them to stay in that role for about 60 seconds. So nothing too terribly long or anything like that. Most people in the world hate role plays, myself included, especially the fishbowl kind. So this one here, everybody is doing it at the exact same time. So nobody's really judging my acting skills or anything like that, except for my one partner, right? But now I'm actually living it in my bones. That's a term I use all the time. You need your staff to live it in their bones when they're learning. So that way, then when they get out into the field and it's go time with campers, they have now experienced it to their core, to where they will draw upon what they learned during your staff training, because they've already experienced, they'll recall it. They will, because they lived it in their bones. So I usually do 3 to 4 different interactions of the as if at a time. So the first one I do is something really light and fun, like greet your partner as if you were long lost college roommates. Ready, go. And so that one is just light and fun. Like, hey, and they all like, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. Where are you at? What you doing? It's loud, it's fun, it's interactive. And then you say, okay, go ahead. That interaction's over. Now go ahead and separate. Stand about 2-3 feet apart away from your partner, face and turn and face them. And what I love about that from a facilitator tip point of view is that as soon as 2 people aren't really close to one another, they stop talking. And that is important for you for the debrief. It's also important for you if you've got side talkers. This is my favorite little tip and trick to use for side talkers as well, because, even if I'm standing 6 feet away from my partner and then if there's somebody standing just really close to me, but they're not my partner, I won't talk to them because they're not my partner. So it's a great little facilitator trick too, if you have side talkers. Just ask them to find a partner. And of course, they're going to partner with the person they were just side talking with. And then ask them to stand 6 feet apart from one another. And now they won't side talk because they're too far apart. So anyway, side note there. So then the next few as if partnerships that I do, well, first I debrief that one. Like, hey, how was that talking to your long lost college roommate? Like, oh, it was light and it was fun. And it was, we caught up with one another and it was comfortable. Like, okay, great. Let's do a different one. This time, I want you to greet your partner, walk forward to greet your partner as if you were co-counselors at the same camp. And maybe you guys had a conflict with one another yesterday, right? Now, all of a sudden you're seeing each other for the first time since you had this big conflict. Do you guys ever have conflict on your staff throughout the summer? I think, oh no, okay, then skip that one. I'm just kidding.
No,
of course we do. Of course we do, right? And so that one is such a great one to use because you can tell them like, hey, right now we're all friends. We've had no conflict because it's in staff training, right? So, but guess what? We're going to disagree with one another. We're going to have conflict this summer. And how we approach the other person is so integral to the health that we have in our team, right? So, and then other things that you can do is like, what I love about staff training too is especially for those brand new staff, this is their first professional job they've ever had. And they've never worked with 10-year-olds at one time altogether, right? So usually one I'll do is have one person, like in the roles, select one person that's going to be the camp counselor and have the other person be the age of camper that camp counselor is going to be working with that summer. And then have them greet your partner as if your camper is really homesick or demonstrating homesick behaviors. And so then they walk toward, and then like for some, for maybe if you work with 8-year-olds, like some of them, they just cry for the entire minute. Like, I want to go home. I want to go. And for this brand new 18-year-old staff person, they're like, my person cried for a whole minute and I didn't even know what to do. Right. And they're like, well, just wait till it's a whole hour. Right. And then what do you do? So anyway, what I love about the as if activity is it is 100% customizable to whatever behavior you are about to teach skills in your staff training. So my challenge to you, listener, is to go through your staff training curriculum right now and identify what are all the different skills or behaviors that you're going to teach your staff in, and then lump some of them together. And then if you're about to sit for 2 hours and talk about, no, I don't know, like pick a hard topic to talk about in your camp curriculum, and then start it with the as if activity. You could even do it twice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and highlight the behaviors you're about to go and teach them. Because now it's one thing to like, oh, great, now we have to go talk about sexual harassment or like whatever, right? Like some of those. But now all of a sudden, if they have had this little mini role play, they're like, oh, that I didn't like the way that felt. And if that happens in the real world, now they're going to lean in a little bit differently into your training than what they might have if they were just like, oh, great, now we have to go talk about, sexual harassment or whatever, right? So that's one of my favorites, as if. And in the virtual space, I use the Zoom platform myself, but you could use whatever platform you're using, but just send them in a breakout rooms for 60 seconds or maybe a little bit longer so that they have time to get in there, have the interaction, and then pop back out. So, and I promise you, it's such a good activity.
I really like that. I use that right now after doing that with you at ACA in my conversation during staff training about communication and difficult
Mhm.
communication and conflict. And we practice many of these things initially, and then we get into practicing Brene Brown's like rumble starters
Oh yeah.
from her book. But I like your idea, Michelle. What I thought, what you're saying, that what I'd like to do, and I'd be curious to hear what you think, Howie, is I am going to do it. I usually do it once, but now I am going to do it regarding sexual harassment practice. You've just witnessed something that feels uncomfortable to you or questionable,
Right.
and how do you approach someone? So I'm going to then work this summer to introduce it in many different areas throughout training, not just that one communication topic. So I really like.
Right, exactly. I mean, because I mean, any of your anything in your curriculum, like there's a behavior that gets surfaced there that you're teaching skills or concepts in. So now surface it to where they live it in their bones and they're not just talking about it, they're doing it.
I would also imagine, Michelle, hearing this approach, that it can be also based on situational or circumstances that occur during the day or at different times of the day. If you're a day camp person, you want to get into what does, drop off look like, or when the buses arrive at camp. In a day camp environment, you could probably do an as if kind of thing about certain behaviors you see in that part of the day. Or so I feel like, it's so applicable to behaviors, situations, that you could really use this as a template to get people sort of really trying to imagine what things feel like, look like, sound like, and then talk about the challenges I would assume that you need to overcome or work through given those role plays. I really like that. Is that also sort of a way you've felt you've used this as well, or have encouraged people to use it?
Oh, absolutely. Especially like if you think about like delivering feedback to a parent about a child's behavior. Well, if your staff have never done that before, that is scary stuff right there, right? And so like have one of them be the parent, have the other person be the person that has to call. If they've never done it before, it's so much safer to practice it with your colleague than it is to go live for the first time with a parent. That you don't know how they're going to be receiving that information. Are they going to be volatile? Are they going to be defensive? Are they going to be, do they want to hear more? Like, that you don't know what you got on the other end of the phone yet. So any type of scenario that you see happen at camp can be popped into one of these as if, and again, the role plays are only 60 to 90 seconds. It's not long. Don't make it painful, because then you're like, oh, it's still acting and like whatever. Because again, nobody really likes role plays. So, so anyway, it's in my
Yeah.
mind, it is the most customizable to your camp and what you do at your camp, because it's your camp is so different than everybody else's camp, and how things operate at your camp are different than maybe the camp they worked at last summer, right? So experiencing it on your campus or in your Zoom room with your camp policies is the best.
And it almost feels like, in using the term as if, it almost becomes this reference to role playing without actually scaring everybody off by saying we're going to role play, because
Right, exactly.
everyone, because I think of my own staff training whenever it's on the schedule that we're going to role play parent phone calls, everyone's like, "Ugh," but
Ooh,
it almost feels like you can set up a really cool trend, and just that as if becomes just this natural way that we explore scenarios and problem solving and different things. So I just know that sometimes my experience with, I guess, labeling something as a role play, people are like, oh, I don't really want to get involved in this. But the as
exactly.
if
And they,
approach, yeah.
yeah. And then going in with defenses up, you're like, oh, role play, right? Like you don't want to go into it like that, right? I mean, already people are like, oh, or here's the other thing. I'm sure many listeners require their staff to read that big camp staff manual before they ever get on property, right? Well, raise your hand if you personally
Yes.
have ever read cover to cover the camp staff training manual. And I have some other creative ideas on how to get them to actually read that too. So, but that'll come up here in a little bit, I bet.
Awesome. Well, it seems like we have just naturally already shifted into one of the topics that we wanted to ask you about specifically for camps that are considering doing virtual training or have already planned virtual training for this summer, because that will be different. So we're curious to know, for those of you who are trying it, that in those who haven't done it in the past, what thoughts do you have to share? Any ideas, things that you learned, anything that I know that I experienced your virtual scavenger hunt. So I hope you'll talk about that. But that's something that I really want to try this year.
Yeah, so that's probably the first activity or the first thing that I would suggest is to, I really got deeply involved in creating virtual scavenger hunts / escape rooms this last year. So taking your content and then customizing it to fit it into something that feels like, a fun event. Now, this one here, you could possibly lump this into team bonding because it's more of a shorter event, and things like that. However, I think it can move into the team building bucket when you are actually debriefing and you're being intentional about the sequence and flow of what you're doing. So when the world went virtual and I was trying to research all these different options to share with people, I found the flippity.net website. And Flippity is owned by Google, and they basically have created several different event type things like scavenger hunts, bingo cards, flashcards. They've got their own Jeopardy templates, and to where you literally can go right to that site. There's a quick demo on one that they've kind of created for you to partake in. Then there's an instruction sheet and there's a template for you to create and build your own. And so for that one, because it was free, that's the one that I decided, this is the one that I can freely share out with people. I'm going to deep dive, learn how to do it really quick so that I can teach others how to do it. And I bet you since last April was when I built out my first virtual scavenger hunt last year. I've probably built out 50 or 60 of them since then. And, and really what I love about them, this is how I get you, this is the idea that I have for you to get your staff to read your staff training manual. Because if you are intentional about creating clues that they then had, that the only way they could find the answers to those clues are embedded in your staff training manual, now you've created this fun virtual event. You send people into breakout rooms, 3 to 4 people on a small team, and now they're searching through the manual together. They're learning at the same time as having fun while doing this event together. So I have, I think probably the scavenger hunt that you participated in, Kelly, was my camp themed scavenger hunt. And I do have that one. I do sell the asset package to that one, and I made it kid friendly. So if you wanted to actually purchase that and do it with your campers, maybe you're doing virtual camp totally this summer. I have a camp that hired me to build out a couple of custom scavenger hunts specifically for their camp because they have kids with high medical special needs. And so they've already made the determination or the decision that they're not going to be in person this summer, but they're still offering virtual camp. And so for them, I've built out 2 or 3 different virtual scavenger hunts that are that just kind of build off of one another. So the first one's a little easier, the second one gets a little bit harder, and the third one just keeps building that momentum. But they're themed in a way that the kids are still having fun in the virtual space. It still feels like camp. We're still doing campy things for some of the clues. And you can get really creative with what you have them do to open each one of those locks. So that's probably my biggest recommendation that I can give to people. That is, it does take a little bit of time to build those out, but there's still, there's a way that you could do it to where you can make it either team bonding or team building, depending on how you frame it.
And it feels like so many of this, as much as we've been focused on staff training, so much of what we're talking about in terms of bonding and building and team development can be incorporated into the daily camper experience too, that there are things that we can do. And it's sort of like you can go from building your own team and bonding, and then almost like developing sort of the teacher programs where they're going to do this in the daily camp program. I'm curious, Michelle, you touched on sort of the idea of virtual stuff for staff and for campers. What's been your experience about, the 18 to 21-year-olds taking some of these teachings and passing them on to activities with kids and stuff like that? Are you finding that more camps are leaning towards that, being very intentional about those aspects, because, we can have arts and crafts and we know we can have our drama programs and all that stuff, but these are sort of like fundamental to the camp experience that sort of accelerate sort of the whole camp experience. Are you finding that people are requesting training so we can pass them on to the kids, these activities, and teaching them how to do it? What's your experience so far with that? In general, not so much given our current circumstance, but just what you're finding in terms of developing your own team building business and the things you deliver.
Yeah. So, I often get called to come out and do summer camp staff trainings with your staff there on campus, and really what I like about those is that a byproduct of me coming in and doing and teaching activities to your staff that they could then use with the kids all summer is you're equipping your staff with really great things, for those time fillers, for icebreakers, for that critical community building time that we do at the very beginning of any session that you do. But a byproduct of that is team building for your own staff, right? So it's not only just equipping them with activities and things that they can do with campers, but at the same time, we're building our own team, and we're finding out what our behavior preferences are. Are you one that I express my frustrations when I have them, or do I keep my frustrations to myself? Like, that's really important to know about your co-counselor. One of my favorite, no matter what organization or type of program I work with, an activity that I wish was 100% required to do anytime you had a staff training was an activity that I call the human continuum. And I use an activity or a prop called the pocket processor, which is a round deck of cards that has the yin and the yang symbol on them. And what I love about that yin and yang symbol, it means that you have opposites. It doesn't mean that one is positive, one is negative, or one is right or one is wrong. It just means you have two things that balance one another out. So my favorite, and you can do this virtually or in person, but I do this in every staff training that I do, whether it be a camp staff training like we're talking about today, or if I'm working with a CEO group of, the C-suite level of some corporate organization, I do this activity every single time I work with a group, because helping individuals understand what their behavior preferences are and how they impact others is really at the core of what makes and breaks teams, because we all have our own behavior preferences. Are you a more spontaneous person, or do you follow more of a schedule? Are you more of a careful planner? Well, it doesn't mean one of those is right and one of those is wrong, but listeners right now, you probably fall into one of those two buckets, right? You're either I'm very spontaneous or I'm a careful planner. Well, it doesn't make yours right and theirs wrong. It just makes them different. And if you're the closest co-counselor you're going to work with over the summer, if you're a careful planner and your closest co-counselor is extreme spontaneity person, then that right there is going to evoke some conflict, because the careful planner is going to need time to think and work things through. Your spontaneous person is going to get irritated. Like, oh my God, wait, just hurry up and come on, let's make a decision about this, right? And so that right there is, your first conflict that that someone's like, well, so-and-so's not listening to me and things like that, right? So if we can do it in our staff training, like, all right, do it I like to do it. I kind of nickname this one as the mental data collection activity. And, have people. So what I like to do is I put a line down the center of the room, or a line down the center of the Zoom screen. And then I present the two sides of the line, if you will. I'm a careful planner over here on the left. I'm more spontaneous over here on the right. Now the line has a value of 0, and then go from 0 to 1, 2, 3 in degrees of severity out to either the walls of the room or the sides of the screen if you're on Zoom. And then give them a degree of severity. The 0 is the line, and then 1, 2, 3, the further away from the line you get. And the further away from the line you get, the more rooted you are in that behavior. So you read off each side, ask people to vote with their feet and place themselves where they see themselves on that continuum. And then the magic moment then is now turn and look and see where the people you're going to work the closest with this summer, where have they placed themselves? And what kind of information does that now give you? Because again, it doesn't make yours right and theirs wrong. It just makes you operate very differently. And so now what you do, I literally want you to meet in the middle, go back to the center line, and let's have a quick discussion on how are we going to handle this behavior or this difference this summer? What's our code word? What's our, if, like whatever it is. And I just wish that was required of every single new team that was formed, because it would just set us up for success if we just knew what. Now, it doesn't mean I can't do the behavior on the other side of the line. Of course I can. But if I'm required to do that, it might take some extra effort and energy for me to do it. A good example of that. So I have a whole long laundry list of different, of different ones that I love to use during staff training. Those two, that I express my frustrations, I keep my frustrations to myself. Let's see here. When I show up to work every day, I want no surprises, or I welcome the unexpected. That's a fantastic one to do, because those that want no surprises versus those that welcome the unexpected, those are two very different responses to things that pop up at camp, right? And as camp directors and camp staff, we know weird things pop up at camp, right? Like, you can't make up some of those stories, right? So what I like about, knowing if I'm the camp director and I'm doing this activity and I'm looking around the room, I'm also collecting some good mental data around who are my people that are going to be really good in times of crisis. Those things that, those people that welcome the unexpected. Those people are going to be like, all right, they're quick problem solvers. Now, it doesn't mean that people that want no surprises can't be good in times of crisis. Of course they can. But if they are in that environment for too long, they're going to reach a level of burnout way faster than those that welcome the unexpected. So that's one of the things I love to look for, and my team is, if you could record it, that can, if you're doing it online, I have them just annotate with their names on where they're placing themselves. So if you can record that, that's kind of good to go back and look and see who has natural gifts in different areas. It's also good to notate if you have one of those scenarios, maybe you have all 37 of your staff on one side of the line and maybe only one person on the other side. Like, wherever there's an imbalance, you're like, ooh, clearly this is a gift of ours. If 37 of us are over here, but what are our watch outs that come from not having a lot of people on our team on the other side of the line as well? So overall, hands down, my favorite. In the show notes, we'll link to, I have a write-up on all the activities that I'm listing out today. There'll be like a link to handouts for those as well.
Well, yeah, that's fantastic. I'm also thinking that last example of that activity, our teams are going to be challenged in ways that we've never been challenged before this summer. We have so many things to consider. I could argue in hearing the importance of doing an activity like that is getting to know the styles of your coworkers and your team members being more important than ever now, because of all of the issues that we face under normal circumstances, but this year in particular. So I think the time you take to get a window or get a view inside sort of how everyone's ticks and how they respond to certain things really will allow you to manage whatever comes your way in probably the most productive way, so you don't have to do the dances and cut through the noise that sometimes we do in teams. So I definitely have taken a note on that one. I can see the value more than ever this summer in doing an activity like that. I really love that one, Michelle. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Kelly, any other thoughts on virtual that you had for Michelle?
Well, I love that human continuum one. I do that with my staff training because of you, Michelle. I love the conflict avoider, or likes to deal with conflict straight on, and then they look at each other or who their partner co-teams are, and it's always interesting ones of like, let's just pause and really look at this one. But I love that human continuum one. It's one I do every year. In response to your question, how about virtual, for me, it's thinking about, we're doing a couple virtual in May to really cover some of the things that we maybe typically do in our gym with the screen and a PowerPoint and some of the policy stuff. And so it will be some of the more sit and get-ish stuff that we've done. So for me, it's how do I do that virtually, keep it engaging, keep their bodies moving, but also making sure that they're retaining that important information and they're not distracted by their phone or another tab. So I really I like the idea of involving some of Michelle's ideas into each one that I'm doing. So
Mhm.
I know that I've seen also your one, when you did it for Wake, was the Have I Ever, where you played
Mhm.
some music and then you asked a question, and they're really light at first. Like, I love coffee. And if you like coffee, you stand. And if you don't, you sit. And then they get more and more like, I have at least one crying breakdown every year at camp, and people stand and some sit. Or getting some initial information about each other. So I think that's what's going to be the balance for me, is engaging, moving virtually, yet with some things that are heavier policy driven, or things like that that we typically would do in person inside at our training. So that's really what's on my mind for virtually. And I think you've given a lot of great ideas that we could use.
Yeah, another, very soon, the Training Wheels website is getting a huge makeover right now, and it should be debuting in about 2-3 weeks. And so and one area that I'm going to have on my website now is what I'm calling the virtual playground. And really what I want to be really intentional about this space to create a safe place to bring kids to play in the virtual space. There's going to be icebreaker question. There's going to be dice breakers, where there's going to be a virtual online dice that rolls. And then there's going to be questions that they can select, if the number 2 comes up, you'll answer dice number 2 question. And then there's going to be dice debrief as well. So maybe you start out your virtual session with the dice breaker, and then you go teach other things, but then you come back and you do the dice debrief at the end. So it's a nice bookend where they're first learning, doing those icebreaker, getting to know the people that I'm playing with today. Then you go do something, and then you come back, and it bookends the skill, if you will. There's going to be story wheels. There's going to be playing card activities, all in the virtual space. No clickbait, like a safe place to bring kids. So that's debuting. And then also, if you do need more virtual team building games and ideas, I have a link on my website to free handouts that have 30, 20, 50, like different handouts that have templates pre-made for you. These are things I did early pandemic. There's also recordings of Zoom sessions that you can go and watch as well, so you could see how it works in the virtual space as well. Those are all free on my free resources and handouts page as well. So if you are looking for other virtual activities to do in the virtual space as well, there's a lot of free resources on my website as well.
That's amazing. Michelle, as we continue this wonderful conversation, I know that you've given us so much to think about. I want to, what's on my mind right now is the stuff that my team is talking about right now. We have this traditional model of developing or delivering staff training, and we know that we have to get into some hybrid of some sort. There'll be some in person, and then some days or some evenings we'll get into some virtual. I'd be curious, given all the stuff you're doing in this area, and now with so much experience in the virtual, like, can you give us a perspective on how to balance over the course of a training period? My team is talking about, like, we can only have them on Zoom for an hour at a time, and then they need a break, and then they got to go do something else. And, I have my own instincts about that, partially because of my age, and I can talk forever, so I can keep people on for whatever, but I know that they're not listening. But the point is that, given your experience, both with the in-person and the virtual, for those of us who are trying to find the right balance between how much is too much and what do you recommend, can you share some thoughts about, some guiding principles around sort of mapping out these experiences for our training?
Absolutely. I definitely teach it in chunks, especially in the virtual space. I would, the maximum, like, don't sit for longer than a certain period of time, right? Like an hour to an hour and a half is pretty good. You can maintain people's attention for the most part for 60 to 90 minutes. Too much longer than that, and you're going to start losing people, because it's so hard to stay focused in the virtual space. A great book that reinforces this concept was written by a woman by the name of Dr. Marcia Tate, and she wrote a book called Sit and Get Won't Grow Dendrites. And it's a great reference. She did her whole PhD research around how the brain physically does not grow if you are sitting and getting your information for too long a period of time. And she actually was able to prove No, she does brain science and all of this stuff. She's a neuroscientist as well. And she was able to prove that you actually only have everybody's attention 1 minute for every year they are old until we turn 16. So if I'm teaching to adults or my 18 to 25 year age range camp staff, I have their attention for about 16 minutes at a time before I need to do something different. Because at that 16-minute mark, that is when the brain physically starts to shut down a little bit. And that's when your mind starts wandering or you get distracted by other things. And you kind of lose focus for a little bit because it's too much for the brain to hold on to. So for me, 15 is a little bit easier math for me. So I am like 15 minutes. I need to either have them stand up, do something, go into breakout rooms for 3 minutes. What did you just hear me say? What did you just learn? Pull them back out. Now the brain can re-engage for another 15 to 16 minutes. Movement in the virtual space is so important. I have a whole YouTube video on here's 10 movement activities you can do in the virtual space. So you can go check out the Training Wheels YouTube channel as well for several resources there. But the Have You Ever Won is a great one. Simon Says, the way that I teach it, is also, it's called Simon Says is a teaching tool. It is fantastic. If you've not seen that one has almost 500,000 hits on YouTube because it is so good. So go see that one if you haven't done that one. That one's fantastic for staff training as well. But so anyway, so there's lots of great ideas for how to create a little movement in the virtual space as well.
That's fantastic. I think Howie and I are feeling the same way as many camp owners. Is there's a lot on our plates right now, and so we really wanted to be able to do an episode where we had some really tangible things that we can help take a little bit of that load off camp owners' plate, to give them some ideas, talk through some of it, hopefully check some things off. So though that's so generous of you to offer all of these and that YouTube channel about movement. I'm going to definitely check that out when I do my planning. Awesome.
Really, really good. So much good stuff. Thank you. And we'll incorporate, Michelle's been so generous to give us some links that we can put in our own show notes for everybody. And we encourage everybody to reach out to Michelle and check out Training Wheels for sure. We are really lucky that we have an amazing sponsor of this show, Kelly and Michelle. They are Camptivities. And we're happy to tell you more about Camptivities. Is your team spending long hours at their desk creating your summer activity schedule? Have they given up on creating the most diverse schedule for your campers? Well, let Camptivities help you create a balanced and engaging schedule without the mistakes. Camptivities does it all. Day camps, resident camps, auto scheduling, staff scheduling, camper and group scheduling, rainy day scheduling, and so much more. If you're looking for a better way to schedule this summer, Camptivities would love to show you how they can help. Visit camptivities.com to set up time to chat and let Camptivities help you get away from your desk and back out to camp. I know Kelly and I both know as veteran camp directors that scheduling can be a nightmare, day camp or resident camp. And I can tell you that, my own experience with Camptivities, my team has just loved working with Camptivities and their team. And no matter the challenge you are facing, I'm pretty confident that the Camptivities team will be there for you, help you out, and make life so much easier in an area of camp that I'm sure we've all burnt out our Excel spreadsheet skills on. I know I have. So thank goodness for Camptivities. So thanks to the Camptivities team, and we really appreciate them being a sponsor of the show. At this time on our show, we love to share something that's inspiring us today. Can be a book, an article, a podcast, a documentary, a leadership quote, or anything else that inspires us to be a better camp professional. I thought maybe I would just kick us off really quickly. I know that I'm eager to hear what Michelle and Kelly have that's inspiring them. Mine is very straightforward. Camp advocacy and the reopening of camps has been inspiring me. The efforts that everyone is making all across North America to get camps open. I've mentioned this before, but I know in my neck of the woods, the Ontario Camps Association, we just launched our planforcamp.ca website, and it's giving kids and parents and the media access to why camp is important, why it's needed more than ever. And we just recently did a YouTube event that has currently over 20,000 views of people who love camp and who want to see camps return. So I'm just really impressed. And I know this all started very early in our season when we spoke to Mike and Soy about Save Next Summer. So this has been a whole huge season of camp advocacy and getting our politicians, our health officials to recognize that we as camp owners can do this, and we want the opportunity to give all of our kids and youth an opportunity at camp. So that's what's inspiring me. I thought I'd kick it off. Michelle, what's inspiring you these days?
I've got, well, you mentioned quotes, so I'll mention my favorite quote and then I'll talk about what is inspiring. My favorite quote is by Zig Ziglar, and it's called, and he's quoted as saying, "They say that motivation doesn't last. Well, neither does bathing. That's why they recommend it daily." I just love it. It makes me giggle every time I hear it. And I'm just like, oh, it's so true. And as camp director, I remember like, how do I keep my staff motivated and whatnot? When I came across that quote, I was like, oh my God, that's my favorite. I love it. And then one thing that is super inspired me lately is I listened to a podcast by Brene Brown interviewing Priya Parker on her book that she had just come out with called The Art of Gathering: How We Meet and Why It Matters. And for me, the title is what first drew me to it. I'm like, the art of gathering. I'm like, well, now that we're all starting to go back to gathering, like we've all now not gathered, unless we've done it virtually, of course, but like the art of gathering, like for me, I'm like, okay, maybe this could be something for me that I could pull into, when we gather to do team building or team development, or just when we finally get back in person again. I want to hear about the art of gathering and why we meet and how it matters. And the podcast is fantastic. I just got the book in the mail a couple of weeks ago, and I've already kind of devoured a lot of it. It's really well written, and she just talks about a lot of things around how sometimes what your vision of what your gathering looks like is going to be inconvenient to other people's purposes. They're not going to have the same vision. So when you think about camp, like you have a complete picture of what camp looks like to you, and that is a gathering, right? But to somebody else, they're going to have a very different picture of what camp looks like to them. And so if your picture and their picture aren't aligned, it's going to be inconvenient to them, or it could cause, anyway, the concepts and what they talk about in the book was just it resonated with me really well. I loved it. It was great.
Well, Kelly and I love our book recommendations, don't we, Kelly?
Yes, we do.
So
yes, we do.
Thank you for
Howie.
that. Kelly, inspiration. What's happening in your world?
Yeah. Oh, geez. Well, what's happening in my world? Well, the first thing I had written down for this podcast recording was a Instagram feed called Big Life Journal. I don't know if either of you have heard of it, but it's got really great quotes about working with kids and youth. And I always find it inspiring. And I write down little notes about things that we could add in training, or a poster that we could have on our wall at camp. So that's fun. But also, I live in Minnesota, and with the recent killing of Dante Wright, it has really, it's shaken us, and it's so close to home. It's there's not a lot of words for it, but what I do know is that it really inspires the DEI work that I've tried to do this year, and even more so of really understanding that white privilege and where this is coming from. And Brene Brown recently had a quote after what happened that said, "Transformation and denial are mutually exclusive." So really understanding that denial and that transformation cannot happen with denial there as well. So I've been reading Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, but also listening to Brene Brown as usual. She has a podcast on One Drop and shifting our lens on racism, and then also listening to hers on inclusion in the workplace for my staff training. So really doing some of the hard work that needs to be done, especially so close to my home. So those are two things that are inspiring me today, Howie.
Amazing.
All right.
Well, Michelle, we can't thank you enough. Kelly, any last words that you have for our audience?
No, this was lovely, Michelle. Thank you so much. So hands-on and practical. We really appreciate it. And I have a feeling that many of our listeners are going to want to be able to get a hold of you after this, to look at your website, check out that YouTube channel. So can you tell us the best way for our listeners to get a hold of you after the show?
Absolutely. So yeah, the website is just www.training-wheels.com. Don't forget the dash, or you get a very different website, and they are not near as fun as I am. So training-wheels.com. And then from there, you can find links to all of our other things. You can find links to our YouTube channel there, or just go to YouTube and type in Michelle Cummings and Training Wheels. It'll take you right to our channel as well. And then my email address is just michelle@training-wheels.com, and Michelle has 2 L's in it. So yeah, that's how you can get in touch with me.
All right, great. What about you, Howie?
If you want to get a hold of me, it's howie@camprobinhood.ca, and welcome any emails. Love some thoughts on for future shows, and just check in. Always love to talk camp. That's for sure.
All right. Mine email is Kelly with a Y at hiddenpinesranch.com. Please do not forget that you can find all of our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod. You can find the resources that we've mentioned in this episode and a lot of good stuff there from our show and other Go Camp Pro podcasts out there. We have enjoyed this thoroughly. Thank you, Michelle. Howie, always a pleasure. And thank you everyone for listening.